What they're present to is there's no one here who's all that interested in what happens to me. And a lot of what gets talked about, unfortunately, uh, is coming from that small conversation. And it has to go through almost this communication collaboration that Ken's talking about, to where there's something being passed on from someone to someone. And then it gets regenerated after there's some sort of competence or some sort of familiarity or maybe just a little bit of understanding, and that gives you the experimentation phase of it, where you kind of go out and take your show on the road to find out whether or not you're actually reproducing, the personalized outcome that comes from that collaboration and partnership. So the interesting thing is, um, in groups of people, I'm just kind of wondering if when somebody shows up for a town meeting, if there are subsets of partnerships, if there's a sense of partnership being generated for the whole group, like if there's 50 or 60 people there and they all have disparate ideas, or there seems to be one or two major ideas, how does a partnership get generated in those circumstances? And this is probably useless in conversation, but probably very useful in terms of when people are in a situation and it seems like a larger version of nobody around here is all that interested in me, which I think is, in those types of circumstances, a lot of what walks through the door in some cases.
Wonder if it's worth considering, is there a difference between a partnership and an alliance? Because I think a lot of times, you go to that town meeting and there are objectives people have, for themselves or for a group or whatever, and they may form an alliance with others who can help move them towards that objective, especially if they're experience resistance from like a counter objective. You got polarization, which is very human. But I'm just curious about thoughts on those two words, and are they similar? Are they different? What separates them?
To me, what
It's
separates them is sorry, Bill. To me, what
that's
separates them is sort of like I don't want to say, but the higher objective or the higher I don't like the word goal, but the higher higher reasoning of what's going to come about. Like does an alliance per se, does a partnership mean that you're partnering toward this, you know, whatever, this greater good? I don't know what exactly to call it, versus an alliance. Like, I'm just wondering if that, to me, that would play into effect, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Like, what is the overall goal or the reasoning for that partnership, especially when you're dealing with two polar opposite things? Like, is it really for the greater good? you know, or is it really just like a personal objective toward like what's going to be better for you?
it's
It's
like
funny.
on
Like
a
I have a
continuum
partnership,
of.
right? Oh, sorry, Bill.
That's all right.
I
This
couldn't
is a
hear you in
very
my ear.
imperfect platform, so we by definition must step on each other's lines every once
Yeah.
in a while. I think what's interesting is that every word has a unique place in language or it disappears. So I think the distinction between partnership and alliance is almost on a continuum of involvement and having some sort of shared something or other with other people, places, persons, whatever, things. But the key distinction in, the way that I look at partnership versus alliance, um, is a little bit kind of like, the breakfast plate, the distinction between the pig and the chicken. You know that the chicken is interested, but the pig is committed. So there's almost like an action difference associated with a partnership where it's clear and present at all times. And an alliance is more or less an agreement to bring into being that partnership activity at some point if it's called for. Like, for instance, if you look at the members, the 39 or 40 members of NATO right now, they all thought they were signing up for a protectorate stronger as a group than as individuals. And yet there aren't many of them that could stand against a major force alone, you know? So that's more of an alliance as opposed to a partnership until they've chosen to do work together. Once the work is on the table and they are in action doing that, I would say that that's where it turns from an alliance, where we've promised something in the future under certain circumstances, and we'll bring the following things that we've agreed to into play, or that's dormant if there's no cause for us to be to execute in a partnership way our promises in that alliance.
The word Merriam-Webster throws in there is bond, a bond or connection between for alliance.
Yep.
For alliance, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because as we're talking about it, I'm reflecting on the fact that a partnership, there's a level of trust. Like, I won't have a partnership if there isn't trust and shared belief that we're moving towards something that's very common to us both in our values. Like, I'm working with someone on a startup right now. And we're at a point where we're ready to actually do a course that'll be monetized. And we had our first disagreement. And the disagreement was about the fact that I feel he should get a higher share of the revenue generated from it, and he thinks I should get a higher share. So,
That's horrible.
and we're both, because it's not about the money for us. And of course, money is energy, and it's important for us to, expand the impact of this project. But we each place a higher value on each other, and that's the kind of partnership I want. I've been in other, partnerships that didn't go well because it was always a negotiation where you had to fight to get enough, and they're competing with you to take more, and some people really like that kind of partnership. So I'm not judging it. It's just interesting. And then on the flip side, we're looking at investors for scaling Questor's Way, and that's probably going to be an alliance where, they're looking for a specific outcome and they're willing to bring revenue in to get revenue out, whereas we're looking at revenue as the thing that allows us to, again, expand impact. But we can work together towards a common goal and trust the fact that we're going to behave in a consistent fashion, but it's not going to be a partnership really. It's temporary, we'll mutually benefit, and then we'll move on. So the bond part is kind of interesting to me because that's not a word I would have thought to associate with an alliance.
Well, I think it's perfect, as a matter of fact, to discover, in the conversation, that a word that is very, very common to all of us may have a different meaning, and it probably has different meanings in different contexts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you think about, what an alliance is, like a union or a guild or a fellowship or a congregation, or all these different groups of people, when you go to church, you're actually in an alliance with the rest of the people that are there and all the other people, who've ever been there and ever will go there. And it's not something that's ever talked about in terms of that until there's work to be done. It's kind of an interesting thing. And one of the sermons that I can recall at the Episcopal Church down here probably 20, 25 years ago was talking about George Washington's speech when he left office, which warned the people who were going to be making the laws and protecting the country to refrain from entangling alliances. And that implication is that to be knowledgeable and to be very cognizant of the bonds that you're making with people, so that you're not writing an open-ended check with whatever may come and committing resources that you have no intention to ever expend. So that all came somehow back into a stewardship conversation about fundraising for the annual, budget. But it was very kind of an interesting take at Alliance that I don't think most people who go to church would ever consider. So what other words would be on that continuum? Association,
Affinity is another one they threw in there.
affinity. What else you got, Lisa?
Accord, covenant, compact,
Yep.
pact, treaty. So then the line that to me makes the lines more blurred with those synonyms.
Yep.
Because if you enter into a treaty, then it's to me that if you've written something down, then it seems to be more of a partnership than an alliance.
Wouldn't that be the evidence of the bond, is to have something written and signed that we're pledging to do this together, and now we'll put that aside and go about the rest of our work until it's ever necessary for us to act on it.
I think a lot of personal alliances, they might be implied but
Right.
there's nothing written. I mean, I belong to a church where you became a member, but I don't remember that when I was growing up. You were just born into it, kind of thing. So which one is, good, bad, or indifferent? It doesn't matter, but I knew what I wanted to be part of, so it made a difference to me that I was acknowledged as a member.
Yeah, I don't remember anybody ever asking my opinion on Sunday mornings as I was getting my little tiny suit on and my tie and all the rest of that stuff with my brothers and sisters and heading off to
Right.
Our Lady of Lords.
Seth Godin wrote a great book called Tribes, and it talks about the things that bring us together, and he was talking in terms of mainly like being generous in contributions and through business and creating things that have value, and he's like such an intelligent human, just he's amazing to read and listen to in his podcasts and stuff. But anyway, it's kind of interesting because I think that he would be much more interested in partnerships than alliances, because it's about that feeling of community and culture and connection where everybody feels a part of something. It's funny, I recently did a Spartan race in Florida, and that's a tribe. Like all these very fit humans running around in mud and throwing spears and climbing up over things and jumping through fire, and it made me want to like buy a T-shirt that said it. I wanted to announce and I'm very not big on that kind of thing, but it struck me, and I thought about his book because they did a great job of creating an experience that helped you feel included,
Yeah.
and it truly was a partnership. They would go out of their way to not just take your money and then it was your job to make it a good experience. They actively made sure that they were creating value and an experience and connection between all the people experiencing it.
Yeah.
It was really kind of neat. So that's a great book, Tribes, if you haven't read it.
I wrote that down.
It's good.
I think inclusion is a great word to
Mm.
go along with alliance too.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, that reciprocal feeling of being part of something.
Yeah.
It's a shared experience, and that experience sometimes can be as short as just a moment or a heartbeat, or it can be a lifetime or anything else. And kind of coming full circle back around to the notion of how human beings interact with each other in groups, especially where they don't know each other all that well. Have you ever noticed that there are certain people that can command attention at the front of the room and very quietly bring everyone else in the room into lockstep, first of all, with their breathing, and then looking around the room and taking a moment to pause, looking at different things, And then at some point along the way, you start seeing the resonance in the whole room, in the crowd, especially if it's not one of these deals where all the chairs are facing in one direction. If there's either people that are